It's a real honor for me to be here with so many people who want to work together to solve this great threat that we face. Climate change has been misframed as an environmental issue. It's not an environmental issue, it's a societal issue. And we need to get over this because I'll tell you, as one of the Green Group leaders for a decade, I can tell you that the environmental community is not big enough nor well organized enough to change this outcome. We're up against some pretty stiff odds and a lot of money. And we need to bridge to a new day, and that new day is by environmental leaders working with faith leaders of all perspectives and with people who care about their future. In 1964, I stood on the beaches of Lake Erie and I watched the end of the blue pike, the extinction of the blue pike. And I watched the Lake Erie at that time turn bright green. And I made a vow that day in 1964 to God that I would spend the rest of my life working on these issues that threaten our world. And God was faithful in that because I met some wonderful people who influenced me greatly throughout my life and who have worked closely with me. You know, there's this wonderful thing about the environmental and the causes that we all work together on, and that is about the intergenerational obligation, and I'll talk a little more about that. But one of the things that affected me when I was in high school was a paper written by Garrett Hardin called The Tragedy of the Commons. And Hardin's thesis was that as we exploit with unlimited restraint any resource, that we ultimately destroy it, that ruin is the ultimate outcome of the tragedy of the commons. And let me suggest that our air is a victim of the tragedy of the commons. The air belongs to no one and yet belongs to everyone. And the polluters act like it belongs to them when it really belongs to all of us, including all of nature. And we must reclaim that ownership in our air. 100 years ago this month, the last passenger pigeon passed from the earth. That bird at one time numbered in the billions in the United States. There were so many passenger pigeons that they would gather in various roosting sites, and the weight of the combined weight of these birds would actually break the branches off the trees. That bird went extinct 100 years ago this month. You know, it seems apart from humans, nature is extravagantly abundant. But we have encroached and we have allowed that tragedy of commons to destroy so many things that are important to us. One of the things that I've learned over the years, a number of years ago, I went to a town called Tyrone, Pennsylvania, and in this town they had a huge paper mill. It was one of the worst in the country. And the paper mill smelled like rotten cabbage. You could smell it 10 miles away. And so as I entered the town, I wanted to help the people deal with this air pollution problem. This is back in the 70s after the Clean Air Act was passed. And I found out that the people in the town couldn't smell this rotten cabbage that just made my nostrils burn. And it turns out that our olfactory system essentially shuts down to odors that we're exposed to for long periods of time. And they literally couldn't smell it. Well, the same is true with carbon dioxide. We're now breathing 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and I defy anyone to actually be able to smell it. Our human senses are limited. They've always been limited. For example, in the early days of humanity, humans brought wolves into their villages and into their encampments because wolves had a better sense of smell and a better sense of hearing, and they relied on that to help them be safe. And those wolves turned into dogs, and we learned to make that transition very well. And today, scientists can measure and can see the carbon dioxide that interferes with the light, the infrared light that we are not able to see. So we now have the instruments that can help us to see. But what we lack is the spiritual insight, and that's what we need to talk about more today. Let me close with a personal story. 5 years ago this month, my daughter, Carolyn, came to me and she asked me, she said, "Dad, would you go into the delivery room with me and would you be willing to cut the umbilical cord for our new grandson?" She knew it was a boy. And so I was in the delivery room watching this incredible event. And I have to say it was a bittersweet moment for me. Sweet because I knew that I would have a grandson that I could spend my life with and I could work with over time. But it was bitter because I knew that this newborn baby was leaving the safest place in the world. And he was entering a world that we're making more dangerous by the day. So the doctor clamped the umbilical cord and he handed me the snips, and I was recommitting myself. That vow that I made back in Lake Erie, I was recommitting myself to that vow. And I must have been taking too much time because the doctor said, "Are you going to do this thing or what?" That little guy turned 5 years old here a few days ago. I heard a knock at my door. He lives not far from us, and I opened the front door, and there he was standing with two toads with a big grin. He had found a couple of friends in the neighborhood. And it's for Sutton and his generation that we need to dedicate ourselves. We need to recommit ourselves for that next generation. You know, I think it's one thing to know the truth. It's the other thing to act on truth. And Tim DeCoster's here, and I hope we hear from him later. And the person that brings all this together for me was my mentor by the name of Ralph Abel. And Ralph came out of the Second World War. He landed on the beaches of Normandy, went all the way, and was a part of the rescuing of those who were imprisoned. But Ralph came back from that experience case-hardened to criticism, but with a very tender heart. And he was my mentor, and he said that stubbornness is not a vice, but a virtue. You just need to be careful what you're stubborn about. And he said, stubbornness will lead to success, and we need to channel it and be careful what you pick to be stubborn about, because you will surely prevail.